Welcome to There is a Method to the Madness. My name is Rob Maxwell. I'm an exercise physiologist and personal trainer. I'm the owner of Maxwell's Fitness Programs, and I've been in business since 1994. That sounds a little bit cooler than saying for the past 28 years, or I just got bored saying it the other way. But in any event, those are the facts. And today's topic is kind of a leftover from yesterday's because people really seem to enjoy yesterday's, which is good because I think I've spoken on this podcast before that I really like topics of exercise psychology and sports psychology. So I'm glad it was popular, and I had some questions and concerns about it. And basically, a couple different people asked me to speak a little bit more about exercise addiction and why it seems that there's a crossover from what we know is more like maligned addictions and more positive addictions. And so I do have some information on that. I've actually studied it and taught it, so I'm going to talk about that today. So first off, let's talk a little bit about what an addiction is. An addiction is anything that causes the person to have withdrawals or increased tolerance. That's an addiction. Anything else could be a psychological dependence or maybe just something in your personality that you think you want, or you might be a little compulsive to something, but basically an addiction is defined as you have an increased tolerance, which means you need more and more to get the same effect, and you have withdrawal symptoms when whatever it is taken away, meaning you might get moody, irritable, anxious, or hyper, just depending on what the substance is. So this came up when in a discussion about why some of the elite endurance athletes, some of the elite athletes in general, and some of the people that appear to be extremists in the endurance world, when they tell their stories, very often they come from a drug or an alcohol problem, and they got into recovery, and somewhere down the line they got into exercise and fitness, which is great, but then it gets sort of taken to an extreme. Now, in not all cases has this become a problem. Like, there are people out there that are still writing books that, in my opinion, are definitely addicted to exercise and some of the ramifications that are involved, but they don't seem to have any problems with it as far as they know at this point. And then there are some that are not, and the problems are pretty evident to everybody else, and probably to them too. Like, they could have a lot of orthopedic injuries, or they might border on having some anorexia or bulimia type issues, which, by the way, go hand in hand with addictions oftentimes. And so those become a problem. But sometimes there isn't a problem seen as far as the naked eye goes. So what is it, and why does it happen, and is it healthy? First off, what the research says, so you got two schools of thought. Like in everything, you have different experts with PhDs that do a lot of research that like to argue about things. One school of thought is that it's a positive thing, and they labeled it a positive addiction for a long time. Like all through the 70s and 80s, it was kind of a considered to be a positive thing if somebody quits drinking or quits drugs, and then all of a sudden they're running 100 miles a week and doing marathons, become extra skinny and obsessed on their food and all that kind of stuff. That was thought to be a nice positive change for a person. And there still is a school of thought that says that that is a good thing. I don't think anybody would disagree that it's better than what they used to do. That would be pretty silly to say, but there's another school of thought that says there is absolutely no such thing as a positive addiction, that all addiction is negative, because all addiction is basically the person going down a road, an empty hole that they think they're going to fill and they can't fill, and their motives are off. In other words, they're not really doing their sport or eating necessarily healthfully for health reasons. They think they are, maybe, or maybe they're, part of them subconsciously thinks they are, but in reality they're really more doing it to reach a certain level of perfection, which if you have half a brain, there's absolutely no such thing as perfection for any creature. So there is that school of thought, and I know everybody is sitting right now on the edge of their seat wanting to know my opinion, because my opinion matters so much more than all these people with PhDs and all these loudmouths on the radio. And in part I am kidding, in another part I'm not, because my opinion matters more to me than those other people's opinion. So I'm going to give you my opinion. Keyword is opinion. Something like this, there's no way you can really argue facts about, because what are the facts? So here's my opinion. Very simple. I don't think there is such a thing as a positive addiction. I think all addiction is going to take somebody down a road and eventually cause problems with them. Having said that, I think it's absolutely more of a positive addiction to running, cycling, swimming, and even eating well if the alternative was drugs and alcohol, because I've never seen those things turn out very well when somebody has a problem unless they stop. If they continue their substance, like they say in AA, they end up in jails, institutions, or dead. So clearly a person running 200 miles a week and they look like Forrest Gump at the end of the movie where he had the long beard and he was wearing the headband, and I think he was wearing red shorts, and I don't know why I have such a visual in my mind right now other than the fact it's a pretty funny meme I see a lot. Maybe you look like him. That's clearly them being dead, better than being dead, or in an institution. Especially looking like that, I don't think it would go very well. Or in a hospital, so clearly, or jail, institution, whatever, same thing. So in any event, I would argue, yes, of course it is better, but isn't there a happy medium? So what is it? Why does it happen? Typically, when somebody becomes addicted to something, it's the dopamine response they get in their brain. That's the biggest thing that we now know about addiction. And addiction doesn't have to be alcohol. It doesn't have to be heroin. It doesn't have to be nicotine. It doesn't have to be caffeine. It doesn't have to be running. It doesn't have to be cycling. It doesn't have to be swimming. It could be your phone. It could be sex. It could be TV. It could be many, many things. So whatever, or shopping, gambling, all these different things. They used to not know, at least like in the 60s and 70s, so much about addiction. People were labeled having an addictive personality and that, and thought to be more hormone related and all that. And in a way it is, but like more in a genetic way. And they're starting to walk away from that a little bit, and I'm not going to speak on that because number one, I don't think they know enough, and I think we can cause more damage by pretending we know something when we don't. But I can say that now they pretty much know that you don't necessarily have to have an addictive personality, if there is such a thing. There's a big if on that, and I'm just going to leave that one out there, to get addicted. That anybody can, that we all like pleasure. The human body is designed to work. It's designed for homeostasis, as I've talked about in the physiology side of this podcast, with oxygen deficit, oxygen drift, and oxygen debt. It loves homeostasis. Our body's always bringing us back. At the same time, our body isn't stupid, and our body knows what feels nice. And what feels nice means that we get a little bit of droplet of dopamine every time we do something pleasurable. So you might think, how on earth is putting New Balance running shoes on and going out at 5:30 in the morning in a humid morning pleasurable? Well, it is, because when you're doing something like that towards your body that's healthy, your body likes it and your body wants to reward you for it. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody likes every second of endurance activity, but just like endorphins that fire off, and there are people that literally think they don't have them, they do. They're just so blinded to exercise that they're not going to really necessarily feel the endorphins, they're going to feel all the negative hormones that are going around the system like cortisol and adrenaline, because they don't really want to be doing this activity. But if you can get past those and get into a state of flow whatsoever, a state of flow is almost like a meditative state to where you're actually able to get into the moment a little bit. And I know I'm getting a little bit off the path, and I will run back on the path here in a second. But basically that comes from being outside in an external environment. And as you're moving and in your visual sight, if you can see things going past your visual sphere of sight, then you actually get into a meditative state. And that actually happens. And sometimes it happens for people better than if they meditate. And that can happen in a pool. People that get, quote, addicted to swimming or just enjoy swimming can stare at that black line at the bottom and they see that it's moving. So because the visual field is moving, it becomes very meditative. When it becomes meditative, your brain starts to secrete more dopamine, which makes you feel good. And then the next thing you know, bing, bang, boom, you're now addicted to swimming when you used to be addicted to cocaine. So that is why oftentimes you will see it. You see it pretty much with people who tend to be type A's and into extremes. They kind of switch from one to another. I had the same person that brought up this topic asked me about religion because they've seen that as well. They've seen people who were very highly addicted to something bad for them like alcohol and drugs, and then they get straight for a while. I don't want to say sober because sober means sane, and if they got sober, they're not necessarily running from one addiction to another. They're actually at a pretty good place in their mind where they don't need anything to find peace, and that's, a great thing. But they might gravitate a little bit more towards extremism in religion. Is it the same thing? I think it is, because again, the dopamine response from the positive response they might be getting from their fellow parishioners, or again, maybe prayer and meditation, who knows? But yes, it can be. Now, please don't go around and say, Rob said that people that go to church are all addicted to religion. That's not what I'm saying at all. I think spirituality and church and religion can be an absolute great thing, and I consider myself spiritual, although probably not religious, and I think it's a great thing. But what I am saying is that anything that you're doing sort of reflexively, without a lot of thinking, and it's kind of taking you away and distracting you from something else, could be necessarily a positive addiction turned negative, because the problem is, if you haven't really gotten to the root of the problem, you're probably going to go back to your old ways, which you see a lot. You don't see it as much with the exercise and diet addicts so much, but you do see them run themselves into the ground, and that's really more what this podcast is about. So I'm going to stay within my scope of practice and talk more on that. So that is ultimately the big problem with an exercise and diet addiction, because your body can't sustain it. So remember, you need more tolerance than you have withdrawals. Now, I will say that if I don't get to exercise at some point in the day, yeah, I can be a little irritable for sure. If I have a run planned and it goes sideways because of rain or time, or I sleep in, I can definitely be a little grouchy. Is that withdrawals? I mean, probably. But honestly, after some reflection on this, I don't consider myself to be addicted to exercise, at least not to the point of what I know addiction is. Do I love it? Yes. Can I be obsessed with it? Yes. But I can also be pretty damn lazy. And I don't know too many exercise addicts that are lazy. I mean, when I read some about these extremists, I mean, the stuff that they do is pretty insane. And I'll get into that in a second. But the problem is, when you have that exercise addiction, you end up really, really running your body literally into the ground. I know runners who, it's so funny, it's like they pattern almost exactly like an alcoholic, a chronic alcoholic would, one that like drinks for a long time, hits a bottom, stops for a little while. Again, I wouldn't say get sober, but stops for a little while. And again, if you listened to yesterday, which hopefully you have, you know that you got to be at least 6 months in before you start calling yourself in a maintenance stage of anything. So let's say they haven't done that yet. They're in that old action stage of 4 or 5 months, but they're doing the activity, meaning in their case, they're going to AA meetings, they're staying sober and all that good stuff. But then they fall off the wagon and they drink again, and then, there they go right back to where they were, and within a couple of weeks, they're, down by the river living in a van, if you know that famous Saturday Night Live skit. So, and then they quit. So, we know the cycle with somebody who goes back and forth with drinking. Well, I've seen the same thing with runners, where they stop running because they get a stress fracture, they get plantar fasciitis chronically, meniscus tears. It's usually stress fractures though. And I've known some that get them in their spine, get them in their pelvis, and those are the sites that gymnasts get when they typically have more eating disorders. So those are the sites that are a little more chronic than just in the shins. I say just because those can knock you out too. But when you start getting them up in the spine and pelvis, you've really done a lot of damage to your body. So anyway, they figure that out. They go to the doctor. They have all these back problems. They have all these leg problems. They have tingling in their feet, numbness, all this. And so what do? I'm gonna quit. And then they quit running because they really can't move very well. They start to get a little healthier. You might see them around town, and I know this is a local podcast, so I'm almost guaranteed to have this go to somebody who goes, you know what, that bastard's talking about me. Well, maybe I am, but you can't prove it, so there you go. And if the shoe fits, maybe you should think about it. So anyway, you run into them around town after they quit running, and they're, again, running is great. I love to run. I ran this morning. I'm saying anything taken too far is not good. And if you're doing it for other reasons, which I don't want to say yet because it's kind of how I'm going to wrap up this podcast. But you run into them. They haven't been running, so they gain like 10 pounds. You look at them, you're like, and by the way, when I say this, gaining 10 pounds is a good thing. You look at them, you're like, man, you look healthy again. Their hair looks healthy again. Nice little gurgle in my throat. Hair looks healthy again. They finally don't have bloodshot eyes anymore. Their face actually looks like it's got a little meat on it. And they just look good. You're like, oh, wow, you look good. What have you been doing? Well, I've been working out. I don't run anymore because I was having some issues, but I do, swim a couple times a week. But, it's not the same, but I'm healthier. And you walk away and you go, oh, wow, they made the right choice. A few months later, you run into them and they still look the same, but they're telling you, yeah, I started doing some 5Ks again. I found out I can run as long as I moderate it. It's like, oh, the old M word. Whenever somebody tries to moderate something, that usually tells you there's a problem there. And I look at them and say, oh, great, because, quite frankly, I'm not going to get in everybody's business and give advice at a Publix or something like that. And most of the time, I can't wait to get away from somebody because I've been talking to people all day. So I walk away quickly and I give them the old brush off and say, well, there you go, tear it up out there and keep going. But in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, here they go. And then in 6 months, you run into them, and guess what? Now they're up to 10Ks. And then they're telling you they decided that doctor, just didn't teach them how to run without getting injured. And it's the goddamn doctor's fault. And they're training for a marathon because they're going to qualify for Boston. It's like, Yeah, I've met many alcoholics that have discovered that too, that decided they can't drink anymore, only to find out that, AA people is a cult and there's a bunch of bullshit and the doctor just didn't give them the right drug to help them get off alcohol, and they've learned how to do it now, and they can really, drink without any problems. And the big problem was their wife, because they finally got rid of her and they realized, that the alcohol wasn't the problem, it was her, and they can drink a keg a night and be absolutely just fine. So obviously the story got a little funny, that's the intent, but that's seriously the cycle that I see very often. I'm not exaggerating. Well, I'm exaggerating the keg a night part, but I'm not exaggerating the runner part. I see it a lot. I see people that tell me they've retired from running. It's like, retired? I mean, you were a pro? I had no idea you were a professional, because that's usually what people do when they retire. That's people that have taken their hobby a little too serious when they say they've retired from it. And then again, there they go. Then they're running a little, then they're 5K, and then they're 10K, and then they're 15K, and then they're half marathoning, and then they're doing full marathons, and then they got their stress fractures back. So that is right there the cycle of addiction. And, again, some people, by luck, grace of God, whatever you want to say, don't tend to hit bottom like that with their running, and they keep going. But I do think, like, if somebody is running away from something, then it's going to come back and bite them, even if it's not like physical problems, because some people just have better bone structures. I mean, some people can just get away with a lot of shit and not end up having a lot of problems. And then some smaller, females that tend to be ectomorphs and tend to be Caucasians have a lot softer bones and are much more prone to osteoporosis and osteopenia, and therefore much more prone to stress fractures. They just can't get away with it. So it's not because they're cursed. It's because that's their body type, and the big mesomorph or endomorph was able to get away with more running. But you're only, quote, running from yourself, so that person is still going to have the same problems, maybe not physical. So I once had an elite person say, and he's one of the great people in the physical fitness, and is Dr. Ken Cooper, and his institute is in Dallas, and he started the Aerobic Boom, and he loves running. And he used a quote years ago that I've always grabbed a hold of, and he said, if you're running more than 30 miles a week, you're doing it more than for your health and fitness. Because he believed that, and again, that's an arbitrary number, and he even came out later and said, I meant around 30 people. I mean, come on, like, it could be 21, it could be 40, whatever. But his point was that you can get all the physical fitness and competitive benefits from running in that moderate number per week. But if you start going above and beyond that, like if you're running these really, really long distances, chances are you're not doing it for your physical fitness. Chances are you're doing it for something else. And this brings up the big debate that I've often found myself in the middle of, because people ask me, they'll say, well, you've done a lot of triathlons. Are you going to do an Ironman? And I always say to them, I said, well, I don't plan to, because I don't believe there's greater fitness in doing an Ironman than there is doing sprint triathlons. And for those that don't know, sprint triathlon is the triathlon version of running a 5K. In other words, it's like the 5K distances. It's a quarter to a half mile swim, around a 10 or 12 mile bike, and a 3 mile run. You can be just as physically fit doing that as doing an Ironman, and I don't care who wants to argue that with me. One's going to take an hour if you're really a faster competitor. The other's going to take just under 8 hours if you're a faster competitor. The elite pro, and I'm not downing them, that's fine too. And I'm not even saying the professional Ironman athletes are exercise addicts. I'm not implying that at all, because for them, they're training for a specific reason, and they just gravitate more towards those longer distances because they're better at them for whatever reason. I mean, again, not to get off track here, but another quote I loved is, you don't pick your sport picks you. So that basically means if you've been training and racing long enough, you kind of figure out what you're better at. And if you're a professional, obviously you want to go where the most money is. And if you find that you're just a long distance pro, like you just tear it up when you go long distances, then obviously you're going to race at that distance. What I'm saying is that you're not more fit, you're just different. So a lot of people, to mask their exercise addiction, start to go up the ladder of distances. And that's a way, always? No. Some people get a bucket list of wanting to do an Ironman. Okay, not on my bucket list. Other people keep doing those things because that is their way up to justify their over-exercise and under-eating or control their eating. They just keep going longer and longer. Nobody wants to admit, well, why are you doing 3 hours on the Stairmaster? And I used to know people that did that. 3 hours on a freaking Stairmaster, I'm sorry, is not freaking healthy. That's not even very sane. So to get out of those kind of like people look at them sideways, they'll say, oh, I'm training for an Ironman. Oh, there you go. So all of a sudden you go from that person who people are looking at a little funny into now you're admired and you're getting all these likes and applauses on Facebook and social media, which again, the dopamine spikes happen, and then you're off and you get a little addictive or more addictive, and then you keep going. Again, it would be a generalization to say everybody that goes longer distances is an addict, just like saying everybody that's ever binge drank at one time in their life or 2 times or 10 times is an alcoholic. Not true. All comes down to motives, how much, how often, and what is the negative effects from it. That's where the addictive sides can come in. I will leave you with this. I once heard a person say, I listened to a podcast, and actually it's Ryan Holiday's podcast, and he was talking about this one day, and I like listening to him because he admits his flaws in areas. So apparently at one time he had a big issue with his phone because he talks about how, he had to set rules for his phone. And he said that what he realized is whenever you set rules, you're addicted to something. That people that aren't addicted don't set rules. So he realized when he said, I'm not going to pick up my phone before I've walked the dogs. I think he does journaling in the morning. He writes for 2 hours, something like that. He said and then he eats his breakfast a little later, like around 11. And then he's going to check his phone. He said that's like his rule, because once he gets into his phone, it was hard for him to put it down. So then he realized, he said, you know what? I realized I'm addicted to my phone, because normal people, acting normally, don't have to set rules. They just don't do it. So I thought that was a great quote. So I think like if you're setting rules, I'm only going to do this then. I'm going to make sure that when I run, I stop at this distance. I'm not going to run on Saturdays. I'm not going to eat this food, whatever. Then you pretty much have a good, baseline that you might have a problem. So how do you get out of it? I don't know. I think that for anybody that's addicted to something, it means that number one, they're avoiding something else, and then they're gravitating towards something that's going to give them temporary pleasure, which is different than happiness and joy, because happiness and joy are sustaining. So in other words, you might hate training and racing 5Ks. You wonder why you would do it, because some people do it, they want to be more fit. But they might not like the training every day. They might detest the race, because if you're pushing hard in a 5K, we call that redlining, and it just flat out hurts. But then they finish and they set a PR, and maybe they win their age group and all that, and they feel this sense of joy and accomplishment. So that's different. That's not pleasure. That's a sense of accomplishment and joy. And that's a good thing. That's like overcoming something difficult to make you better on the other side. That's a good thing. Matter of fact, some of the most fit people I know and are very healthy mentally hate exercise, but they do it because they know it's good for them. I did a 5K on Sunday, and I saw a guy finishing, and he was very big. He was overweight, and listening to him and his wife finished just a little bit ahead of him, I could tell he had been coming back from maybe some kind of physical problem, maybe just obesity, he'd already lost a lot of weight. And I could tell this because he was wearing compression socks, and not the kind that runners wear, more fluorescent green and all that, but it was the kind that you would wear if you were having circulation problems. And he was slightly overdressed, because you could tell he was a little bit maybe embarrassed of how he looked or whatever. And he finished the race, and he came across the finish line, and his wife was waiting for him, and they asked us to take a picture of him at the finish line. I'm like, absolutely. So, and this was a person who was so thrilled with himself that he actually did a 5K. And then later on, it just so happened that he got an award, and he was shocked. He was like, oh my goodness, I haven't done one of these in 5 years, and da-da-da-da-da. And I couldn't believe, and he was all happy, and he goes up and he gets his plaque or whatever it was. So that's a super positive thing. Like, that's a moment of happiness and joy. And he doesn't strike me as the type of person who's necessarily addicted to more and more and more. He simply is trying to do something to improve his health, and him getting out there on a hot, humid morning on Mother's Day in overdressed clothes and compression socks to do this, and to struggle through it. I mean, it was I'm not going to judge any time as slow or fast, because there's really no such thing, but it took him a little while to be out there, and that makes it even harder because it's hotter and all that. But he did it, so that's a sense of an accomplishment. That's a positive thing. That's a good thing. There's a huge difference between temporary pleasure, where we get likes on Facebook and we feel this, little ego thing going up when we do something, where we get that quick little dopamine, spike. That's a little bit different, and we have to learn that pleasure doesn't always equal happiness on that. So I hope this has been educating for you, educational or educating, whichever way you want to look at it. But I hope it's been educational. There's a lot on this subject. I had a little more time today, 30 minutes to cover it. I hope it made a little bit of sense. And if you have any questions, definitely feel free to ask me. I'd love to answer them for you. And if you ever have any ideas on the topic, let me know. All right, without further ado, I would like to thank our sponsors, Jonathan and Lynn Gilden at the Gilden Group at Realty Pros. As I've said before, they are hustlers, they are fit, and yes, that matters, because they're going to be out there willing to work for you. They love knowledge, they love working. I know Jonathan, and he talks about how hard he works for his clients. He wants to be the best at what he does. They currently have over 275 star reviews on Zillow, and between the two of them, husband and wife team, they've generated over 100 million in sales. That matters because it means they know what they're doing. People who aren't good at their jobs don't sell anything, right? So if you need anybody to help you buy a house or sell your house, please give them a shout at 386-451-2412. And until next time, be Max Fit and be Max Well.